And there we are. All right, and we'll go ahead and bring your presentation up.
Just need the first one.
Okay, just for right now. Okay, let's bring it up. Intro to NXDN. All right, well, we're back now on hopefully live here on YouTube at this point. And yes, it is streaming, so there we are. I didn't ask you. All right, let's see here. All right, now hopefully that should be in desktop mode. If not, I got to go to share screen.
Who's that ugly guy?
Me. And share. And there we go. And we are sharing. So let's see here. And you should be good to go now. Well, and everybody should be able to see the slides. I'm going to introduce Paul Toth NB9X, who will be doing our next presentation. This will be first. Now, the second one we're going to record, but this one will be on the actual, we can only stream one of these tracks. We didn't have a chance to set up to string the other. So he's going to do introduction to NXDN amateur radio. So if you wonder what NXDN is going to be about, now you're about to find out. And as soon as I can get this thing to go into slideshow mode. And lovely. And the computer's being a little non-cooperative today. And there we go. I am impressed. All right.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, very good. The acoustics in this room are designed for large groups of people and for dealing with disasters. So the acoustics are extremely good. I want to make sure that everybody in the room here can hear us. Good morning. As Daryl said, my name is Paul. The call sign is November Bravo 9 X-ray, and I am the president of the West Central Florida Group. That may mean absolutely nothing to you, but I'm sure all of you in this room have heard the call sign NI4CE. And that is the linked analog repeater system that is operated by the West Central Florida Group, and that I am very proud to say celebrated its 21st birthday just this last Thursday. It has been 21 years since the first NI4CE repeaters went on the air at Verna in Manatee County. The system obviously much larger now and encompasses all of West Central Florida. What many of you may not realize is that in addition to the NI4CE analog system, we also have been operating since 2009 a linked NXDN digital repeater system from all but our Polk County site in Bartow, simply because there was an existing NXDN repeater already here, so no sense in duplicating it. And we currently do not have an NXDN repeater located at our Lake Placid site. However, having said that, our NXDN footprint does get into Highlands County, as is evidenced on Wednesday evenings when we do our weekly NXDN net for West Central Florida. And we have a user that very often is in Sebring that gets into our Verna repeater system just fine. What is NXDN? That's the magic question. Well, it is a common air interface, a protocol that has been developed by the technical industry. It has several emission designators as doled out by the FCC, but maybe most importantly, NXDN is a direct result of an FCC report and order issued in December 2004 that laid out a roadmap for taking the typical 25 kilohertz channel that existed for Part 90 land mobile radio, still exists in Part 97 amateur radio, and it takes that 25 kilohertz channel and slices it and dices it 4 ways. It's how you can be spectrally more efficient and make a lot of improvements over what we've all known as wideband analog radio. The FCC document says we, as the FCC, would like to see 6¼ kilohertz channels, So we could take that 125 kilohertz and make 4 channels out of it. We'd like you to use frequency division multiple access modulation, FDMA, and we'd like the signaling to be 4 FSK at a baud rate of 4,800 baud. That kind of lays it out. And that is the basis upon which NXDN was jointly created in 2005 in a joint venture by ICOM and Kenwood. It took that narrow banding report in order for Part 90 and created a technology that exists today, thrives today, not only in Part 90, but also is finding its way into Part 97. And it is, to be quite honest with you, the only true 6.25 kilohertz technology out there that meets all of the parameters of that FCC R&O and operates not only in Part 90 radio, which is commercial land mobile, but it is now finding its way into amateur radio under Part 97, into the marine radio service, Part 80, into the broadcast auxiliary service used by radio and television stations under Part 74. And in a moment, we'll talk a little bit about a project that the West Central Florida group currently is in the middle of, working with 2 broadcast partners to improve not only the NI4CE system, but also demonstrate that all of this can play nice in the sandbox together. There's 3 modes for NXDN: conventional mode, Type C trunking, which has been adopted basically by Kenwood and uses a control channel to handle and manage the multiple trunking repeaters that will be involved in the system. And then a Type D trunking, which is kind of like the old analog LTR. And Type D, a distributed control model, has been adopted primarily by ICOM. Now, contrast and compare. Analog, we've got VHF and UHF. Here in amateur radio, for the most part, we are still going back 40 years with 25 kilohertz wideband analog. We do use CTCSS and PL to keep one repeater from interfering with another repeater if they're on the same channel, but it's still a one size fits all. And for those of you who do use the NI4CE analog system, you do know that if you key, as an example, our holiday repeater in Pasco County, you will also key up at the same time 5 other repeaters in Hillsborough, Manatee, here in Polk County, right down the road, and in Highlands County in Lake Placid. It is literally a one size fits all. Now, there's nothing wrong with that because it does allow the one-to-many part of VHF and UHF communications to literally play out, and particularly for emergency communications, disaster response communications, really for our Skywarn nets to help keep West Central Florida safe. That one-to-many works very nicely. Now, by contrast, you'll notice on the right side of our screen, NXDN Digital. Yes, it also operates in VHF and UHF, but we only use a quarter of the bandwidth per repeater, per channel that we're using on wideband analog. Yes, we have something that is similar to CTCSS. It's called RAN, short for a radio access number. There are 64 of them, and they work the same way in digital that a PL tone or CTCSS works in analog. Now, here's where we separate and where we really get granular. There are no talk groups in analog, so there's no way to logically bring groups of people with the same set of interests together. NXDN Digital changes that. we have talk groups so we can focus communications based on some similarity or commonality as far as communications. In addition, NXDN also supports individual calling. So, Mike, if I wanted to call you directly, I can pick up my radio, and if I know your ID number and I've got your ID in my alias table for individuals, I can call you directly. I do not have to stop or, go past go. I don't collect $200, but I do get to have a nice conversation with you. One thing about digital, and I don't care whose digital it is or what the format is, digital requires an individual ID for every radio. And one of the things about NXDN that maybe was a shortcoming in the overall design of the format is that it supports individual IDs based on the power of 16. It's a 16-bit technology. So we only have 65,535 IDs that are possible. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it will enable people literally at the moment all over the world to talk. Now, there are people, and some people that are smarter than me, that are working on this to try and figure out a way that we can be a lot more inclusive and expand this. It may require something called natting, which has become very commonplace with IPv4, or it may take expanding the overall NXDN protocol to encompass more IDs. But we'll get to that when it really becomes a problem. Now, with analog, we have simplex operations. I'm sure everybody at one time or another has keyed up 446.0 or some other simplex frequency, and you've talked maybe one-to-one, one-to-many. In analog, we also have repeater ops like NI4CE. NXDN digital is not that different in terms of what it can do. Yes, you can operate an NXDN radio in simplex mode. You can do everything with an NXDN radio in simplex mode that you can do in repeated mode. So if you want to establish a simplex talk group, you can do that all day. If you want to establish something that's larger, or you want to do individual calling in simplex, you can do it all day. And you do not sacrifice quality. A simplex call takes up 6.25 kilohertz. That's your bandwidth for simplex and repeaters. It will sound as good in simplex as it does on a repeater all day, every day, 24/7, 365. With NXDN, as is already on the boards here in West Central Florida, you can have one repeater, two repeaters, three repeaters, more. And in fact, we have several repeaters spread out over our 10 West Central Florida section counties that are linked together full-time, 24/7, 365. What separates NXDN from analog, however, is that with a little skill, a little programming, we also offer the capability that if you only want to bring up one repeater, you can do that. Or we can create talk groups that encompass maybe not the entire set, but a subset of the repeaters. We have one such talk group right now running through our NX Core server glue. It's called Talk Group 1215. At the moment, Charlotte County is that talk group, and it was created for the hams in Charlotte County that have NXDN radios, so that when they use Talk Group 1215, they're not coming up on the other NXDN repeaters So those other NXDN repeaters are available for use with other talk groups. We do have a plan to expand 1215 into Lee and Collier County. We have recently had some discussions with the owner of an NXDN repeater set in Collier County, and when they come online, they will be connected on 1215 as well as several other talk groups. And there is a reason for that, which our section emergency coordinator probably is already aware of. And all we have to do is remember Hurricane Irma, which hit Collier County first, then came up through Lee and Charlotte, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some synergy there that we can take advantage of by bringing Charlotte, Lee, DeSoto, and Collier County together, because they're going to be in a similar scenario on the front lines. They can take care of their business without interfering with other operations that may need to take place to the north. One other thing about NXDN. On an analog system, we've all heard the snap, crackle, pop, hiss, whir, and everything else that goes along with weak signal analog. And sometimes I get the feeling that some people actually try not to have a strong signal. With NXDN, there is superior weak signal operations. How superior? Well, an NXDN radio from all of the manufacturers is designed to decode the digital stream down to 100 or minus 116 dBm. And if you will excuse me just a second, I
happened to be preaching on Wednesday night. My dad called me.
I wear a medical monitor because I am a type 1 diabetic, and that just told me that I need to pay some attention to something. So we'll turn that off for the moment. Minus 116, you know what that sounds like in analog? It sounds like snap, crackle, pop, whir, hiss, and usually is unreadable. Minus 116 in NXDN can sound crystal clear. Not always, but much of the time it does. And the signal at minus 110, which can also sound very noisy, will sound as good as a signal at minus 70 dBm. Now, how good does NXDN actually sound? Well, I've got an NXDN radio here right now, and I've got it coming through the repeater that's about 6 miles down the road in Lakeland. It's operated by KD4EFM. It's a little bit of delay here, so I don't want folks to get completely discombobulated. But we do have a couple of folks out there on the West Central Florida NXDN network right now. And I'd like to call for N4PK. N4PK, this is NB9X. Do you copy? Over.
NB9X, N4PK, copy you loud and clear. We're sitting in the middle of Pinellas County, coming in through the system in our Seminole repeater for the NXDN network, and happy to join in the WCF section TECHCON. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody here.
Paul, we read you loud and clear. Have a lot of folks out here in the audience this morning that are nodding their heads and going thumbs up. One thing, tell us what talk group you're operating on.
I'm talking or using talk group 1200 right now.
Okay, very good. And for everyone here at TECHCON, Talk Group 1200 is established to be a Florida statewide talk group. And it not only supports and connects repeaters here in West Central Florida, but also some repeaters in other locales around the state. And it's designed to be built out so that eventually, when we have NXDN in places like Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, that all of those repeaters can come together on talk group 1200. Okay, Paul, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're going to break with you and for PK, and we're going to call next on Tom, K9XV. K9XV, this is NB9X. Do you have a copy?
NB9X, K9XV in Charlotte County in Punta Gorda, Florida. How are you today? Hopefully the presentation is doing fine up at TECHCON, and just got back into town. So back to you, Paul. NB9X, K9XV.
Good morning, Tom, and you are loud and clear from Charlotte County. For those of you in the room, and I know I don't have to tell Christine this, but for those of you who are in the room who aren't aware of this, Tom is also the EC for Charlotte County Aries and an organization in that county called CC Flares, as in Charlotte County, Florida, ARES. And Tom recently has been using NXDN, using the new Charlotte County repeater to great advantage. And Tom, could you talk about that for just a moment?
In fact, we just did an exercise on Thursday where we used NXDN as a back channel to provide us digital communications up and down Charlotte County with the leadership throughout the county, so the CC Flares leadership. So that gives us another channel or another methodology in which we can talk across leadership. The next stage to this is to also engage the EOC leadership with NXDN, so that way the leadership of both the EMA and CC Flares can work together. It provides us another great channel, and then of course the next stage to this is to be able to talk EOC to EOC. So we used it yesterday or on Thursday, worked great. We used it throughout the entire county, and it was a great addition to our communication schemes. Back to you, Paul. NB9X, K9XV, Charlotte County.
K9XV, NB9X. Tom, thank you for that explanation. And right now on the screen here on YouTube and here in the conference area, we are showing a coverage map that shows the several NXDN repeaters and their coverage footprints. And down at the south end of the map at the moment is the Charlotte repeater, which went on the air in December. So Tom, thank you very much. I would like to show the flexibility of NXDN, however, Tom. So what I'm going to do with my radio is switch to the alternate talk group, and I will give you a call when I'm over there. So if you could switch to 100, I would appreciate it. And NB9X. And what I'm doing right now is switching to an alternate talk group that we have set up. K9XV, NB9X. You will not hear it on that radio.
NB9X, K9XV. Thanks for coming to my favorite talk group, Paul.
Very good, Tom. We have you loud and clear here at the Polk County EOC in Winter Haven. And I will explain to the crowd now the importance of what you and I just did, so that they have a full understanding of how this impacts communications, particularly emergency communications and the clarity. So thank you much. We'll let you get going. 73 NB9X.
Very good, Paul. Very good. Well, just to let you know that just before he goes and explains this, on our during our SET on Thursday, our exercise on Thursday, we used our local talk out also. And that way we could just communicate amongst each other here in Charlotte County. So we'll let Paul explain. Have a great day. K9XV, Charlotte County, Punta Gorda, Florida.
Thank you, Tom. NB9X clear on Talk Group 100. Now, what we did through the magic of what we can do with NXDN is that using both the repeater that is right up the road here in Lakeland and the repeater in Charlotte County, we switched not only to a different talk group, but one of the things you want to have in just about any kind of a communication system is redundancy. When we were talking using Talk Group 1200, we were using an NX Core server. This is a server that has been created and software written by amateurs to help improve the connectivity of NXDN repeaters. Talk Group 1200 is managed by an NX Core server located in a commercial data center in Orlando. And it serves a lot more than just West Central Florida. There are talk groups on that server that are as far away as France, Spain, and Germany in Europe, and all the way out into the Far East to the west of us. But we all know that our good friend Murphy likes to lurk around and usually present himself at the worst possible moment. And in fact, that did happen earlier this week. Right in the middle of our net Wednesday night, for some reason, the NX Core service in Orlando failed. Well, to combat that, we have created a second NX Core server. And that's what we were talking on Talk Group 100. So the system not only works, but it has redundancy. We're still working out the bugs so that the backup NX Core server will also operate on 1200 and the several other talk groups that we have here in West Central Florida. And essentially just be a mirror of what exists, at least for West Central Florida, that exists on the server in Orlando. More on that to come. For those of you who either already have an NXDN radio or are seriously entertaining an NXDN radio, you obviously need to know what the frequencies for these repeaters are. That's it. And you'll notice that some of them, including the repeater here in Polk County, the repeater at Verna, the repeater at Charlotte, have frequencies that are 4 digits to the right of the decimal point. It actually could go 5 digits to the right of the decimal point, and these radios will work all day. And that is a true NXDN only frequency. So as you can see, we can slice and dice the bandwidth. So the next time you turn your analog radio on and say, why can't I get a repeater coordination? Well, it's because we're still using 40-year-old technology. We don't have to. NXDN is built for real live amateur radio. Daryl, how can I reverse on this?
Hit the left arrow, I believe.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. These are the main talk groups for West Central Florida. Talk Group 1, we haven't talked about that yet. Talk Group 1 is a local only talk group. So Mike, I want to call you on the Lakeland repeater. I don't need to call you on Talk Group 1200 other than to make the call and then say, Mike, can you go over local? And if Mike is on Lakeland and I'm on Lakeland, we can use Talk Group 1 and only tie up the Lakeland repeater. The rest of the system is not going to hear what we're doing on Lakeland. Just as Tom noted that on Talk Group 1215 that they used on Thursday, they only tied up the Charlotte repeater. Talk Group 1200 is statewide. It also at the moment encompasses repeaters in Brevard County on the Space Coast, And we're looking at adding a couple of additional repeaters in Collier County sometime in the next 60 days. If we have an operation that only encompasses or only needs to encompass West Central Florida, and essentially the repeaters that you see on the map, we can go to talk group 1201. And at that point, the repeater in Melbourne, the repeaters in Charlotte, the repeater or in Collier, a repeater in Tallahassee may not need to be involved. That's how selective we can be. One other talk group that is currently under development, and it will be present for hurricane season this year, is talk group 1299. This is for Skywarn operations for the counties here on the west coast of Florida, because we found during the last year that while Skywarn operations on NI4CE analog work great and connect the many counties that are under the jurisdiction of the National Weather Service in Ruskin, we also found that some people who are Skywarn operators, when they know the storm is coming, will lower their antennas, take their radios off the air, or be able to operate on a portable radio. So guess what? That's where NXDN really comes into play, because we've got better sensitivity, better selectivity, and frankly, better audio. And this actually happened to me about 5 years ago. I was on my way on a business trip to the Gainesville area. Lo and behold, when I got up near the Pasco-Hernando County line on I-75, which at that time was heavily wooded in the median, they've since removed most of the trees, but at that time, lots of trees. Severe thunderstorm with a downburst drops a tree over the traffic lanes of the northbound I-75. Had to hit the brakes fast, but then also had to raise somebody on the radio so that people could be warned and we could get emergency crews out there. Yes, from that location, I could hit the NI4CE holiday repeater on 443.45 analog, but I was kind of scratchy, and wet trees tend to impede radio signals. So the operator on the other end had NXDN, as did I, and I said, can you move over to NXDN? He did, and I did, and there was never a question thereafter about what I was reporting, where I was located. He got the message first time, loud and clear, just as if I were standing right next to him. That is a real story and something that I think speaks volumes about what NXDN is. So we are adding Skywarn and a special Skywarn talk group to NXDN this year. I'm going to make a couple of comments now, and I'm probably going to become a major irritant to some people. NXDN, along with all of the other digital modes, suffers a deficiency, and particularly in amateur radio. All of us have come to know and love amateur radio analog because we have to have radios and we have repeaters on VHF and UHF. And most of the communications that occurs on VHF and UHF and amateur radio goes through repeaters, because otherwise you're limited by distance and by signal strength. That has not happened in most places with these new digital modes. The new digital modes are relying on the internet as the way of connecting the dots. Yes, for the most part, you have to have a digital radio that goes about maybe 50 feet into a hotspot, which is nothing more than a computer running some software. That hotspot then connects to the internet. Or if you are mobile, some hotspots will allow you to connect to the cellular network. Yes, you're using 4G LTE for ham radio. The problem with hotspots is that once someone has invested the $100 or $200 or $300 in a hotspot, they think they're set for life. And we have found through experience, there is very little effort to get a consensus or get a synergy among ham radio operators once they've invested in that hotspot to actually invest in the other half of the ham radio equation, and that is repeater infrastructure. Without repeaters, those radios don't go very far, and they sure don't go mobile very far. Hotspots, in my humble opinion, have become digital echo link. And it's nothing more than a VoIP service that utilizes the commercial internet and commercial communication services to connect one operator with another operator. If it were more like IRLP, where it connects a repeater to another repeater, that would be another thing. But digital has been stymied in its development in amateur radio for two reasons. A, the potpourri or potpourri of formats that are out there, and B, the lack of infrastructure. As president of the West Central Florida group, we made a commitment in 2007 to digital. And we made the commitment in this context. A, the digital has to work as well as the analog, if not better. We have to be able to connect the repeater infrastructure in digital in much the same manner as we can connect the analog, and it has to be reliable. That commitment spelled out two things. A, the same model repeaters that drive NI4CE analog are the same model repeaters that drive NI4CE NXDN. It's the same box. It's just different software settings. No, the analog repeaters don't necessarily run off the same towers and transmission lines as the digital repeaters. In some cases, it's even better on NXDN. At our Holiday site, our analog antenna is at 1,100 feet on the Rock 98 tower. The NXDN antenna is at 1,200 feet, an even bigger footprint. But our commitment is to West Central Florida, and anybody and everybody, if you've got a ham license, you have a linked wide area coverage digital repeater system that you can play or do real things with on NXDN digital. And if you need to go off of the repeater system to operate simplex, you don't need 43 different radios. The same radio can be programmed for simplex as with digital and with a repeater. That is our commitment. You're not going to get that with hotspots. I'm not going to say we're going to prohibit hotspots from NXDN unless there are a couple of other things that we have recently picked up on where you really don't need a radio anymore to do NXDN on a hotspot. The hotspot can be your cell phone. That becomes a problem if the operator of the hotspot doesn't have a license. But our commitment to you and to every amateur radio operator in West Central Florida is that you not only will have, you do have a linked wide area, fully functional NXDN repeater system right now. And we will continue to maintain that and improve it as time goes on. Now, NXDN radios, who makes them? Well, NXDN was created in 2005 as a joint venture between ICOM and Kenwood. They're the two main players. They, however, are not the only players. Alinco manufactures NXDN radios. Rytron manufactures NXDN radios. Theirs are a little more specialized, and they get into some things like security apparatus, some things for the railroad industry. Oh, and by the way, all of the Class 1 railroads like CSX, BNSF, Norfolk Southern, all of those guys either have already gone NXDN or are in the process of doing it. And that's by mutual agreement. These are just some of the NXDN portables and mobiles that are out there. And full disclosure, yes, I do make part of my living as an ICOM land mobile radio dealer, which is what NXDN products fall under. So yeah, I'm kind of partial to ICOM, but you know what? If you've got a Kenwood radio, it works just as well on NI4CE NXDN as an ICOM radio does. These radios provide a variety of capabilities. Newer NXDN radios support an improvement in the overall protocol called over-the-air alias. That is, when you press the push-to-talk button, first time, every time, you can transmit your call sign in the mode you are operating in. So theoretically, you never have to say it again, but we do because that's good operating practice. Radios like the F6400D and the F4400 DS and DT also have built-in GPS receivers. So if you're an ECOM and you're part of a search and rescue, you can not only talk to the other folks that are part of your team, you'll actually know where they are through the radio. These radios work, and they're not that expensive. No, you will pay more for an NXDN radio, anybody's NXDN radio, than you will pay for a Baofeng. I would hope so. Because you know what? You get what you pay for. You're not getting much with a Baofeng. With NXDN, you're getting a tremendous amount. And at the risk of being political, because I know in some circles that's just not cool, but at the risk of being political, the NXDN radios don't come from China. They're made in Japan. Think about that for a second. Here are a couple of examples of Kenwood portables. And in the case of a couple of Kenwood portables, you can actually get multiple modes. ICOM has decided not to go that direction, but with some of the Kenwood radios, you can also get DMR and or P25. I want to talk for just a moment about antennas. I call this affectionately the porcupine because it has three elements. It's a quarter wave antenna. We talk about the magic of amateur radio. In 2007, and because part of the West Central Florida group's origins have been in the broadcast industry, and yeah, I was a commercial broadcaster for 17 years of my professional life. You tend to look at things that broadcasters have to do to get signals into your living room or into your car. And one of the things that broadcast did way back in the 1960s was wrap their arms around something that will work mobile as well as stationary and provide clear quality signals to their customers. It was called circular and then refined to elliptical polarization of antennas. Why? Because nobody ever has their antenna pointed directly 90 degrees north. We all have this when we talk. Circular and elliptical polarization helps deal with that tilt, if you will. But it also does something else. It also helps reduce bit error rate in digital signals, anybody's digital signals. And we've all seen now that television has gone digital, now that commercial radio is going digital, and two-way radio, which is what this is, whether it's amateur, Part 90 land mobile commercial, Part 74 broadcast auxiliary, Part 80 marine, it's two-way radio. We all deal, whether we realize it or not, with signals that sometimes are received directly and sometimes indirectly. And it's usually a mix. If you're driving through a downtown area, anybody's downtown area, you will have signals bouncing off of buildings. Every time a radio signal bounces off of anything, it changes polarity by 90 degrees. If it bounces twice, that bounced signal is 180 degrees out of phase. And you know what that does? It has a tendency to diminish or cancel the direct signal. That's at 0 degrees polarity. Isn't that a hoot? Now, the radio industry has not openly embraced circular or elliptical polarization for land mobile radio antennas. But back in 2007, and again, as part of our commitment to experimentation, which is really key, we still do that in amateur radio. We got together with, at that time, the largest television antenna manufacturer that was already producing circularly polarized antennas. They cut a special low power antenna to work on an amateur radio frequency. We put it on the tower at Riverview, and then we went out and did 3 days of field tests, capturing data. Here's the bottom line. Against a vertically polarized land mobile radio antenna, that circularly polarized antenna saw an increase of 6 dBd in signal strength, or RSSI. But what it did for the bit error rate was even more dramatic. With that antenna, we realized an 11 dBd improvement in the bit error rate, which is everything for a digital signal. Well, at the same time, we're doing this with Dielectric Corporation, which was the antenna manufacturer. A company up in Elyria, Ohio called MP Antenna created the Porcupine. And the numbers that they were able to derive when they field tested the Porcupine virtually matched what we had with a circularly polarized antenna on the infrastructure side. So most repeaters are going to have vertically polarized antennas, just by virtue of the fact of how much they cost. How you can improve your bit error rate and your ability, both on analog, but particularly digital, is with an antenna like the Porcupine. And you know where this also works really, really well? For those of you who are tied up in communities that have deed restrictions, zero lot line, or you're in a condo and you've got to put your antennas in the attic or nothing, this antenna will outperform a vertically polarized antenna and run rings around it all day, every day. And I know that because several of the hams here in West Central Florida that had been operating with vertically polarized Yagis pointed directly at the repeater have seen dramatic improvements, particularly with NXDN signals with this omnidirectional multi-polarized antenna. And you know what? It's not that expensive. You'll pay, in some cases, less for that antenna than you would some verticals.
I just looked it up, Paul. They were saying $69 for that antenna.
Or less.
Wow.
Or less. So we got to wrap it up here pretty quickly, but conventional voice, it works. Use a RAN or selective squelch. Here's the difference. If you use RAN squelch when programming your radio, it just simply looks at that RAN code, be it 1, be it 28, be it 14, and that's what it bases your squelch on. That figure will be in the header packet of your communications. If you want to use selective squelch, well, now you've just opened or started opening a second gate. So with selective squelch, for your radio to actually start jabbering, you've got to match the RAN and either the talk group ID or the individual ID. And you heard before when we went between talk group 1200 and 100, that radio right there worked just fine on 1200, but you didn't hear a thing on 100 because it's set to selective squelch. Good operating practice. When you're on the air and you're keying up for the first time, let people know what talk group you're on. Because if you've got multiple talk groups going through the same repeater and you're using ranch squelch, you're going to hear everybody because you're only gating on that RAN code rather than the talk group. As we said earlier, some of the newer radios from Kenwood and ICOM support over-the-air alias. It's fantastic. And one of the things is people buy radios because there does need to be a neat, orderly, proficient way of identifying people and making sure that we don't have two radios out there with the same ID. That causes all kinds of mayhem. We encourage anybody getting into it to register with radioid.net on the internet. There you can get, if you're going to use DMR, a DMR ID or an NXDN ID. Wrapping this up, NXDN is real ham radio. And here in West Central Florida, we've got both sides of the equation covered. You've got your radios, we've got the infrastructure. And believe me, there are some clubs that are operating these ICOM repeaters that haven't figured out that they can also operate NXDN, but we're trying to twist their arms. NXDN is clear, crisp communications. The audio frequency response that comes out of this radio is tuned to the human ear. So you're not wasting a lot of energy needlessly on frequencies that our ears just simply can't decode. NXDN radios, by virtue of how they are built and by virtue of the vocoder that's in here, also are excellent noise canceling devices. You can be driving down our very noisy interstate roadways at 70 miles an hour, and the party on the other end will never know you're mobile until you tell them. But most importantly, and when you compare it with wideband analog, NXDN will give you not only the same coverage as a wideband analog signal, but an additional 10%, which will fill in weak signal areas, inside buildings, or at the periphery. But there's no snap, crackle, pop. We've got to leave that to Kellogg's, and it's about time we did. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
If I already have a DMR ID, would that work for NXDN, or I would need to get us?
No, you need to go back to radioid.net and ask them to give you a specific NXDN ID.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around different digital modes and understand them in some detail. The one thing, NXDN seems to have a lot of technical advantages, perhaps over some of the others. But what I'm trying to understand is the limitations of the RAN, I think you said it was. I was shocked for you to say that it was only 16 bits. I mean, the computer industry moved on from that decades ago because it's so limiting. It limits you to 64,000. As you know, DMR IDs are well north of 200,000
Yeah.
now. How much of an issue do you see that is, and how will that be addressed?
Well, it's something that I think ultimately the NXDN Forum, which is the trade group of 30 plus manufacturers that now produce either radios, test equipment, dispatch consoles, the whole broad range of products. I think it's something the NXDN forum needs to take a look at, but we're not going to wait for the NXDN forum to figure it out. We have got some programmers right now looking at ways at natting NXDN IDs so that, let's say you're in some other part of the country and your ID may duplicate an ID here. Well, how can we make all of that work on our stuff here? It's something that is a concern. One other thing relative to that I do need to make this point on VHF and UHF. We've got DMR, we've got P25 phase 1. We could have P25 phase 2 if anybody's pockets are deep enough. And there are 2 or 3 other modes that are amateur radio only. What sets NXDN apart is it is true 6.25 kilohertz, both through the repeater and through simplex. Those other modes are 12.5 kilohertz. And you know what, as long as they are, the FCC is never going to get to its ultimate goal of slicing and dicing the bandwidth and opening up more frequencies for more repeaters, for more services and what have you. I will close right now by saying we will have another session this afternoon at 1:30. We're going to talk about beyond the basics. We're going to talk about NXDN messaging and how it can be used tactically or just for fun. We'll talk about some other programming tips as well. And if anybody else wants to see me in the meantime, please, by all means. Thank you.
One question I'll ask as a geek kind of guy.
All right.
Is the standard published and open?
The standard is published. It is open. It is available at nxdnforum.com.
Very good.
And if you go to the ni4ce.org web page, we have a whole section about NXDN, including the coverage map you saw there. But there are also several white papers out there that talk about NXDN, how it works, why it works. And we recently just published a new white paper out there that talks about how the marine band, so for those of you who have boats and have radios on your boats, marine radio is going NXDN.
All right, well, this time we're going to end the YouTube stream.